Hi, and welcome to the Creative Process Overview. I'm really excited to bring this lesson to you because I love the creative process. You might be asking, what is the creative process? Well, the creative process is a workflow from the initial planning phases of a project to the creative to the final deliverable to the client. Following and using a creative process is important for you to ensure you're delivering the best possible solution to your clients. Regardless of what agency I've worked at over 20 years, the processes pretty much remain the same. It might seem obvious, but I want to ensure you understand how the pros work every day. Now, the digital creative process always starts with planning and strategy. This is where you gather info from the client and you ensure that you're taking all the right steps to move the project forward. And then once you have all the appropriate information and content, then you would move into the UX, wireframe, and architecture phase. Now, this is focusing on the digital creative process, which is what this class is about. But if this were a print project, you obviously wouldn't have this phase of the process. Now, once we have the blueprint figured out or the UX wireframe figured out, then we move on and we present this to the client. And this could be done, with PDFs. It could be done in person. It could be done with an online tool. Regardless of how it's presented, the most important part is to have this phase and present with the client. Then ultimately, there will be revisions. Could be 1 round or 2 rounds of revisions, but it's very important to figure out this structure and this architecture before moving forward into design. And then, of course, we would move into the creative design phase. And this would all be based on the planning and strategy, the UX wireframe and architecture. Once we're 100% prepared and we know which direction we're going, then we move into the creative and design. And then we repeat the presentation and the revise and finalize. Once again, this can be multiple rounds, but it's important to understand that you present, revise, finalize, and you might need to present again and revise again until you can actually get to the end solution for the client, which brings us to implementation and delivery. So once the design is done, then you would hand it off to the programmers, or it would be exported and be uploaded for an online advertisement or a banner ad, whatever the end deliverable is. In order to get to this point, you need to go through the appropriate steps. I typically refer to these as phases of a project. The planning and strategy phase, it's important to get everything you need from a client before starting the project. You need a clear picture of what they'd like done, an outline of content, photos, logos, and their company color palette. Anything else that will help you in the creative process. The architecture phase. After you gathered everything from the client, like an architect, we'll make sure we know all the pages we need to design and that we understand the organization of the site. This is called a site architecture. Sometimes this can be obvious, but it's good to make sure you are thorough with your clients. And the UX phase. Before spending countless hours on a design, a UX is created. If you've never heard of these 2 letters before, they represent user experience. This is a very simplistic representation of the structural organization of a website. However, it's incredibly important because it communicates to your client the key content components that will be included in the design of the website or whatever digital design you're working on. It could be a kiosk, it could be an iPad application, or an application for a phone. And of course, everybody's favorite phase, the creative phase or design phase. During this phase, you will review all the client assets, their creative requests for the project, and get in the mindset of the project. Pro tip, it's always best not to start with the computer, but to start with sketches on paper so you can think through your ideas before you head to the computer. Another pro tip, I always research competing companies to see what they are doing and look at ways to differentiate the creative. So a little bit more on the design and creative phase. I make lots of notes on color, layout, type, and visuals. I also look for stock photos necessary for the creative as well. You might not even have copy or content from the client in your first design. That's why professional designers use what's called Greek content. It's your job to understand that you are designing within their brand and for their company and not for yourself. It's not about what you like, it's about what is right for the client. Then, of course, we move into presenting to the client. If it's a small online project, then sending the design options through a website or email as a PDF is fine. But if you're working on a much bigger project, I always present over the phone or in person. You could also present via online screen share, but sometimes the technology can be problematic. Pro tip: I always present in PDFs. That way they can download the files and comment in the PDF. They are also easily shareable. Just another note on the present phase. You could use a third-party storage site such as Dropbox or Box.com to post files. Some of these sites have commenting built in, which is nice. It's important that you get feedback on the work in a written form so you can ensure you make all the changes. And you have the changes in writing as evidence of direction you were given. And not everybody's favorite phase, but updates and revisions. You've presented to the client, and there will always be updates and revisions. It's part of the business, and it's part of the creative process. You'll typically have a few rounds of creative revisions on colors or compositions, and you might not even have copy or content in your first design. Pro tip: always make sure you communicate that there are 2 to 3 rounds of revisions included in the project. That way the client doesn't think they can make unlimited changes, and they make more concise decisions to move the project along. And of course, once we get everything said and done and we have an approval on the design, depending upon the project, the implementation in the final phase of a project can vary. If it's a website, it's handed off to the programmers. If it's an online ad, you'll export the final design as a JPEG or a PNG format and send it to the client. If it's a print brochure, you'll package the files and send to the printer. That's why it's important to keep your files well organized and clean so a programmer can open the Photoshop file and extract the colors and styles, and graphics or assets, whatever they need. A few more things about the implementation phase. Pro tip: as you work on projects, it's important to do what's called versioning. If you create your initial website concepts, keep that file as version 1.psd, however you want to name it, but it's important to put a number after it so you know that was the first design you worked on. Once a client chooses a design, then duplicate the file and name the end of it version 2.psd and delete the other concepts to keep your file clean, light, and organized. But keep that first version because the client might go back to it. And as I just mentioned, this is important because the client might go back to something you initially presented, and you might have to get what you need from that file. Well, that's the creative process. It's important to follow a process to ensure a better solution for your client and a smoother, more professional workflow for you. Before we go, I bet you have one question. What about billing my client? Well, some key notes about billing. You should always have a signed agreement before starting work and make sure it's clear what you're doing. I always ask either for 30 or 50% of the fees to begin work. If they've seen your portfolio and want to hire you, then they should have no issue providing payment up front. I never recommend ever doing spec work where you design, and if they like it, they pay for it. However, if you are just starting out and you might need to do this to try and get some initial work and build a portfolio, or you can create your own example projects. I really hope you enjoyed this lesson on the creative process. I really enjoyed creating it for you. Just a reminder, throughout the lessons I'll be pointing out pro tips that I use every day as a professional designer. Alright, let's keep going.